welcome to this review of my Dell 8011W keyboard. I've been typing on it for the last 3 weeks or so, and before that it came brand new in its box, so this is a pretty fresh specimen. This particular type of keyboard is really quite common among mechanical keyboards. It's also very cheap. You can easily get one for under 20 quid. It's huge. I really quite like its huge commanding presence and the curved backplane. I also really quite like that, but that's a matter of personal preference, I guess. But if you have the feet not extended, it does feel like the keyboard is tilted back, but like that, which is quite annoying. I can't really do a full review because of the state that the old keyboard is in. As you can see, it's not particularly good. Something really bad must have happened to it. I don't know what, but that's why I was able to get it for free. I essentially saved it from the scrap heap. There's a lot of damage.
That's a lot of damage!
You can see the casing is split into two, and there's a little bit missing. And then it has a bunch of shortcuts. I didn't even know all of them, to be honest. Both of them are not that different in the end. The difference is quite small, and I might not even be able to feel it if I was blindfolded. I'd be able to hear it probably, but feeling it... Hello and welcome to this review of my IBM Model M keyboard. I bought it a while ago, brand new, off of some prize money that I had won, and I want to share some of my experiences with it. It feels like a brick. I try to lever it from one end with just one hand. It's actually really hard. I'm actually quite straining right now. So even though people hail this as the mother of all keyboards and the best keyboard ever made, do remember that a Model F is superior in almost every way that you can think of. This is probably the loudest keyboard you can get. So if you're in an open office, I don't think your colleagues would really thank you for taking this keyboard with you. Nonetheless, if you're at home, it is delicious to type on. I could do this all day. No, it's really nice. Personally, I still prefer the White Alps' noise, but the feel of the Monterey switches is very nice. They have a delightful, delicate typing feel that makes you type lighter to such an extent that after I'd used this board for several weeks, I had trouble going back to an Alps board because normally I really kind of hammer the switches, you know, like I type like that essentially. But this board made me type so light that I couldn't really push Alps switches all the way down anymore. Which was a bit strange to experience for the first time. All in all, this keyboard is not particularly spectacular, but the switches inside of it are. Hello and welcome to this review of my Cherry G80 3000 HMFGB. Quite a mouthful. The thing is, the keyboard is in a few ways decidedly un-German, specifically the construction. It is one of the flimsiest keyboards I've ever seen. It's very thin plastic and it's all clamped. There's not a single screw in this thing, which is really annoying. In addition, there is no metal plates in there or anything to hold it. It's just a printed circuit board, and the printed circuit board is not held in place by clamps or screws or anything either. It's just kind of floating around, and if you want to disassemble and reassemble the keyboard, you gotta kind of guess where you need to put the PCB, because even the bottom of the plate has nothing to guide you to where it's supposed to be. Unfortunately, I can't run this keyboard as I lack the hardware necessary to run it, so I had to break my usual rule of using a keyboard for at least 2 weeks before I review it. It is an Apple product through and through. It looks quite futuristic, it's a little bit gimmicky, and fairly weird in a lot of ways, and I'm going to try and cover as many of them as I can. First of all, the feet. Or rather, the foot. Now, the slider can be adjusted to any level, so it's kind of an analog control. It's fairly stiff. There you go. The keyboard itself is already angled. It has this tilde-like shape. So when you combine the two, it sits at a huge angle, at roughly this angle on your desk, which is fairly hilarious. I don't know who would want to type like that, but the option is there if you want it. Say the G key. Normally, if the legend is here, that would mean that the rest of the key is roughly here. So we're trying to hit it there, and that doesn't really work all that well. I'm not a touch typist, so I have to look where I hit the keys. So you have delete and this, which I'm not sure what that means. I think it looks almost like it would mean the same thing. I'm not an Apple user, so I can't really tell. I think that must be made for your middle finger or something, because if you put your index finger on that and then try to hit the Y key, that's just doesn't work. I mean, I've got fairly long fingers, but you know, I just can't get over there comfortably. I think I'd get cramped within half a minute doing that. Even this key, which I think is the power key, gets these cream or ivory Alps switches on them. So you get a tactile dampened power key. The profile's flat, presumably to avoid confusion with the other keys, which are obviously cylindrical. You can see that no, it doesn't read all that well. I compare that to a keycap from the other keyboard, and you can immediately see the differences. This keycap is much higher quality than these, because you can see them. Because you can see the writing is much clearer. It's very high contrast, nice and thick, very, very nice looking. And this just looks a bit flimsy by comparison. And I think linear switches are a little bit of a specialty of Cherry switches, because these do feel very, very linear. Nonetheless, they still feel a little bit unsmooth, a little bit rough. There is definitely some friction going on, and you can even hear it. I'm going to try and demonstrate that. They have a very high spring return force. If you press it and then release it, it pops back up very aggressively. So much so that it feels a little bit like a chore to press these. And in fact, even for small tasks of typing, you know, just typing a small email, these switches just feel annoying. All in all, I'd say this board with these switches is a little bit of a mixed bag. I don't really see what it's particularly good at.
There's currently no cases where that's useful or important.
It features rubber domes and a membrane, so some people wouldn't call this a mechanical keyboard, or they might call it a semi-mechanical keyboard, but let's not dwell on semantics here. Don't forget that the Model M also is a membrane keyboard, and no one would really deny that that's a mechanical one. Screws, actual bona fide screws, so you can dismantle the keyboard if necessary, and it's much, much tougher. Obviously, these can't corrode off, so in a way, this is actually more tough than a Model M. So lots of points there. Well done, Fujitsu. And the middle bit with the rectangular hole looks like it should be able to accommodate an Alps keycap, but it doesn't. I'm not sure what it's exactly compatible with, to be honest. Nice little light there. Overall, it's not great to type on this keyboard. It's okay for the normal keys, but I wouldn't really recommend them. The worst thing, though, is the stabilized keys. They use a simple shaft to guide them, which is extremely ineffective in this case. It's so bad that I had to put these red stickers on. They don't come with the keyboard by default, but if you try to push the shift here, it just practically doesn't budge. If you push it in the middle, it's very, very, very rough to the point of being unusable. So you really have to push it there. So that's why I put red stickers on all these stabilized keys, because otherwise it's simply intolerable. Speaking of yellowing, this is the most yellowed keyboard I've ever seen in my life. It's really not for me. It feels like a buckling spring keyboard that's gone off. IBM buckling springs, like in Model M, are just so much nicer. And despite its age, I got it 100% unused recently as part of a trade in exchange for my old Cherry MX Blue keyboard. Now, after I made a video review of that keyboard, I got a lot of offers for it in quick succession, so it turned out to be a lot more popular than I thought it would be. The switches it uses are Alps SKCM Blue switches. Complicated blue Alps. I know the camera makes the slider look very blue, but actually it's a lot grayer than it appears on this camera. These are consistently some of the most highly rated switches in existence. They're quite rare as well, so they will fetch a great price, whatever board they're found in. Even shitty donor boards will fetch £80, and a good board will fetch considerably more. Overall, this is easily the best keyboard I've ever tried. Focus were one of the most interesting keyboard manufacturers on the market, and this one is no exception. It is definitely among my more interesting keyboards, though it is also by far the most willful and temperamental one. If you use keyboard mode and then any of the extra keys, like the memory keys, the computer does make a sound though. I'll show you that sound. I'm not too sure what that means really. First we switch from KB to calc mode, like that. Then we switch it on. Then let's say 1 plus 2 plus 3 equals 6. Add to memory. 9 divided by memory recall equals 1.5. Memory clear, on, back to keyboard mode. Several Focus keyboard models had a calculator like this, and all of them are super unreliable. Usually the calculator, the board, or both don't work. If you display a lot of characters, some of the digits will start missing. I'll show you that now. So as you can see, it becomes quite vague. You can't really see all the digits all that well anymore, which is a shame really. And it also has a big ass enter key like this, which is actually my favorite type of enter. But in order to accommodate for this, you need to sacrifice space for another key elsewhere. And what many layouts do is that they put that key here and then have a small backspace unit. But that is extremely horrible. I don't know who thought that that would be a good idea. For aesthetic reasons, on this one, they put a blank key here, so it doesn't read anything on it. But this key is not purely cosmetic. You can press it, it has a switch under it, even PCB traces, and it even generates scan codes. If I press it, then it will show here 0 by 56. Still, it does actually have an output. If I go to Notepad and press it a couple of times, you will see that it generates a backslash. In other words, this key generates exactly the same output as the backslash in the other recess. But the computer does know they're different. If you try to bind in, for example, a video game, something to this key, it will usually call it something like OEM 102, so the 102nd key, or OEM backslash, and it knows that it's not the same. So if you bind something to the blank key and you press the backslash key, or the other way around, it will not trigger it. Then I put a sticker here myself to remind myself which of the keys had snapped off and which I therefore glued back on. I can't disassemble those anymore, so it's a useful reminder to have. You can see the LED through, which looks quite nice. Further to that, there is lots of colored lettering going on. The escape key is red, both of the control keys are red, and the keyboard on is red, and the shifts are green, and both of the alts are blue, as is the toggle button. And this has secondary colored legends too, so it's a fairly colorful keyboard. Overall, this keyboard is great fun, but is unreliable as all hell. If you can get one that's working, which almost certainly will entail buying one that is still new in its box, it's great fun, and I could definitely recommend you to try that out. Hello and welcome to this review of my high-tech 725, so named because it sits 0.725 inches off the top of your desktop. Its age shows in its build quality. It's built like a tank and it feels like a brick. Honestly, if it was solid plastic, it couldn't have been any tougher. You will probably need one of these to make the keyboard running, because this keyboard has an XT protocol, which I don't think any computer has been able to understand since the mid-80s. It's very old. Being an XT keyboard, the layout is super weird. It's got 10 F keys arranged vertically along the left side of the keyboard, and the backslash key is to the left of the left shift. And where the backslash key would normally go, there is the tilde key instead, and where the tilde key would normally go, there is the escape button. And even more confusing, the caps lock space is occupied by the control button, and where the control buttons would normally go, there is one alt button on the left and the caps lock button on the right. And it also lacks arrow keys and nav cluster, instead you have to use the numpad. The numpad is also different, it doesn't have a multiply or divide button, and the screen is at the bottom left of it. Because there are very few keys in the bottom row, the spacebar on it is gargantuan, comically long. It was made in the United States in 1989, but let's be honest, despite the considerable yellowing of the keyboard, it looks like it could be 10 years younger than it really is. And as you can see, there is a huge amount of twist in the keyboard, and that's pretty worrying. And due to a fault in either the membrane or the electronics, some of the keys don't work properly. So for instance, if I press left, it always also triggers pause. And if I press down, it triggers numlock, and right triggers divide. V and B teamed up, as are N and M, and most annoyingly, space and enter trigger each other, which is very annoying because every time you try to space two words, you also put in a new line. And to demonstrate how bad that is, I've typed "the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy old dog," and as you can see, that didn't turn out particularly well. Furthermore, the teamed up keys are blocked by the 2-key rollover, so if you hold Shift and either V, B, N or M, it doesn't register. So if you try to type IBM Model M2, instead it comes out as IODL 2. Not very effective there. Quite a difference. Other than those small differences, some of which are really minor, it's pretty much the same keyboard. They weigh roughly the same. I'd say they're comparably sturdy. The layout is identical. The legends are identical, including the weird triple delete thing that I talked about earlier. Delete, delete, and delete. Somebody enlightened me. Apparently these two deletes are the same, but nobody could really explain why there had to be two symbols for the same function, or why both deletes had to be called the same even though they work in opposite directions. As far as I know, this is the only non-big ass enter model of any keyboard they ever made. Right up until the end, Focus kept putting big ass enters on their keyboards, and as such it's puzzling to see a keyboard they made without one. Almost all old Focuses have at least one interesting feature, and this one's is a semi-transparent, pretty badass looking red-brown built-in dust cover. It's detachable by pulling it out sideways when it's not fully open or closed. Works like that. And because it's so easily detachable, and because it's not transparent, most people will take it out and then don't put it back in so as not to block their view of the monitor. So many covers get lost, and most on eBay don't have the cover anymore. In fact, the last generations of 2001 were not even manufactured with the cover at all. Somewhat confusingly, the numlock and caps lock lights are reversed, so numlock is in the middle. Because numlock is generally on fairly constantly, when you glance at it, it looks like actually the caps lock light is on. So that takes a little bit of getting used to. Hello and welcome to this review of my Dell 8101. It is part of an important family of keyboards nicknamed the Alps Bigfoot, so named because they were A, originally made by Alps Electric, and B, huge. The Dell 8101 is the most important member of this family in the West, and the three most important versions of this keyboard are: A, the original. The last is the Dell 8101W. Of the three, it is by far the most common and the least desirable, as well as the cheapest. It is pretty easy to get one of these for around £20. And then finally there is this one, also called the Dell 8101. It is chronologically in the middle of the three. In almost every way, it's a middle way between the older and newer design, but one or two things are unique to this keyboard specifically. First of all, it's heavier than either of the others because of the addition of a stainless steel plate at the bottom of the case. This plate weighs about 160 grams. I weighed this on an analytical balance in our lab. Even the cable is a middle way between the old and the new keyboard. It has coils like the 8101, but it's fairly thin, just like the 8101W. These early Black Alps are completely different though. Don't make the mistake of thinking they're similar, because they might as well have been made by a completely different manufacturer. And in fact, if someone tells me they were, I would not be surprised at all. It has great switches, very nice sound, and like all Dell 8101s, it has a great build quality and a nice weighty presence. It does take up quite a lot of your desk space, but I would say that it looks pretty good, so it's not exactly like you're soiling your desktop or anything. The design is quite obviously inspired by the Dell 8101. Dell 8101 or Alps Bigfoot series. They're quite different though and easily distinguishable. There's no springiness in this whatsoever. I hope the camera picks this up, but the light reflecting off of the printing might give away that it's slightly raised. Colleagues might not like them, however. One thing I can't really get used to is the layout, specifically this tiny 1-unit backspace key, which is a common byproduct of having a big-ass enter like this. It's because the enter key takes up more space, so you need to put the key that is occupied by this space in a different place. But instead of putting it here and having a tiny backspace key, I'd much rather they move this key here, like Focus did, or to the right of the shift, because this tiny backspace key really pisses me off. That's it. Dell 81